Hello everybody and welcome to Week 6. It was another surprising game for the Bucs offense. It looked really good. We'll talk about that Bucs offense from a fantasy football perspective going forward. We'll also talk about a couple of players who have been a little bit of a disappointment through the first 5 games of the season, a couple of guys who have been surprises through the first 5 games, and we'll talk about a few free agents that you might want to add if you've got another guy on bye week or you need to add a different player to your team. So let's start with those Bucs. What a difference Glennon makes, right? You know, that poise in the pocket that he showed, the 2 touchdowns again, back-to-back games now. I think that's the type of performance we all were expecting from the 12-year veteran Josh McCown and not the second-year guy in Mike Glennon. But Glennon's ability in the pocket has really added the value to Vincent Jackson again. He had a huge week last week with 8 catches for 144 yards. Lewis Murphy added the touchdown, but I think Vincent Jackson's the guy from fantasy football perspective that is going to be a must-start for the Bucs going forward. Now, the other guys like Murphy and Safari Jenkins, they can have good games, but they're a little bit too inconsistent for my liking. Now, when we talk about Doug Martin, too, coming into the season, Doug Martin was probably going to be the most promising player in the Bucs team from a fantasy football perspective, but he just really hasn't been able to get it going. Now, he's had an injury early on in the year. He's back now, but he's only had 14 carries a game in the last 2 games. That's a far cry from the 25 carries a game he was averaging in 2012 when he had his breakout season. So from the Bucs fantasy perspective, I really only like Vincent Jackson next week, and he's going to be someone that if he's on your team, you definitely want to keep him in the lineup. So I think we all can agree that Doug Martin has been a bit of a disappointment this year. Let's talk about a few other players who have been disappointing so far and a couple of guys who have been surprising. We'll start with quarterback. Now, Eli Manning's come on strong the last couple of weeks, which is surprising to me and a few others out there. Last year, he had 27 interceptions, and if you watched him in Week 1, you figured he was picking up right where he left off. But he's already got 11 touchdowns this season, and all of last year, he finished the season with 18 touchdowns. So I think he's getting closer to the form he had when he led the Giants to the Super Bowl. Now, speaking of Super Bowl quarterbacks, we'll talk about a guy who's been a little bit disappointing, and that's Tom Brady. For the last few years, Tom Brady's been one of the most consistent quarterbacks in fantasy football and in the NFL. But this year, he's just not throwing the touchdown passes like he has in years past. Through 5 games, he's only thrown 6 touchdowns. That would put him on pace for about 19 touchdowns this season. That would be his lowest total since 2001, his first year in the NFL. Now, it's possible that Tom Brady can get things back on track, but what concerns me is just the lack of weapons around him. So I'm staying away from Tom Brady. You can probably find more points from a quarterback that's on waivers in your league right now than what Tom Brady's been able to put up the last few weeks. Now let's move on to wide receiver. One of the most surprising players in the league this year is Golden Tate. Now, Golden Tate played his last few years in Seattle where they don't throw the ball a whole lot. The run game is more of a focus. But now he's in Detroit, and the Lions throw the football probably more than any team in the NFL. And Calvin Johnson, the #1 target in Detroit, has been battling an ankle injury, and he might not even be playing this week. So Golden Tate, look for him to pick up right where he left off last week. He had a really big week, 7 catches, 134 yards, and a touchdown. I look for that type of production to continue from Golden Tate. And as far as disappointing wide receivers, it's Riley Cooper from Philadelphia. Everyone expected the Eagles to come in this year and just light up the scoreboard like they did last year, and Riley Cooper was a big part of that last season. He had about 850 yards and 8 touchdowns last year, but when you look at what he's done so far through 5 games this year, he's only got about 150 yards and 1 touchdown. So I don't know if that's just a problem that the Eagles are going to have to work through, or if Cooper's production's really going to be that down this season. And lastly, let's talk about a couple of guys who might be available to pick up as free agents. The first one is Brandon Oliver from San Diego. Now, the Chargers have been through 3 running backs already this season, and Oliver's next in line. He had a huge week last week on his first opportunity to really contribute. He had 182 total yards and 2 touchdowns. Look for that type of production to continue in the next coming weeks. The next guy is another running back, and it's Andre Williams for the New York Giants. Now, Williams is getting an opportunity because of injury as well. Rashid Jennings went down with a knee injury, and Williams has scored touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. He's the feature back now in New York, and look for him to make a big splash on Sunday night against the Eagles. And the last one's another New York Giant, and that's Odell Beckham Jr. He's a wide receiver out of LSU. He was the 12th overall pick in this year's draft. And I already mentioned how Eli Manning's having a good year, and Beckham's going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of that. Last week was his first game this year. He missed the first couple weeks due to injury, but he came in a big way. In his first game, wasted no time getting his first NFL touchdown. So that's all I've got this week. Thanks again for watching. I'm Matt McGuire, and remember, #ThePlank on Twitter if you have any questions.